Let's jump right into this explainer, because today we're investigating a brilliant microscopic warfare behind what honestly feels like the cold from hell. We've all had that cold, right? The one that just lingers and lingers, leaving you coughing, blowing your nose, maybe feeling a bit run down for a week or two. But the illness we're looking at today takes that everyday annoyance and turns it into a highly sophisticated, deeply insidious biological invasion.
The ancient Chinese actually had a deeply chilling phrase for this: the cough of 100 days. Just let that sink in for a second. 100 days. This is a disease that lingers far, far beyond a normal cold. It intensely plagues its host, sometimes for months on end, turning the simple, automatic act of breathing into an exhausting daily battle.
The difference in the threat level here is honestly staggering. Your standard viral cold, it's symptomatic, lasts a few days, and is mostly just a minor inconvenience. But our subject today isn't a simple virus. It is a highly sophisticated bacterial invader known as Bordella pertussis. In Latin, per literally means intensive, and tussis means cough. So it doesn't just cause basic symptoms. It sets up a progressive, deeply intensive infection right inside your airway.
To truly understand the stakes, I want you to consider the number 5. Because before we had vaccines, this single bacterial disease killed more young children than 5 major historical terrors combined. We are talking about measles, scarlet fever, diphtheria, polio, and meningitis. Put them all together, and this was still worse. It was an absolute monster. So you have to wonder, how does one microscopic organism wreak that much havoc?
Well, it all starts with the invasion. The human trachea is a brutally inhospitable place for a bacterium. It's coated in thick mucus and lined with these constantly beating cilia, tiny hairs that are actively trying to sweep invaders up and out. To survive that hostile environment, Bordetella pertussis relies on an incredible mechanism: avidity. The word actually derives from the Latin avidus, meaning to crave, and it absolutely must crave a rock-solid grip on our airway cells to keep from getting violently swept away by our mechanical defenses.
And here is where the bacterium's toolkit gets wild. Instead of actually invading our cells like most pathogens do, it sits completely outside in the airway, anchoring itself in the storm. It deploys these massive protein grappling hooks. First, it uses something called FHA for a loose attachment to those cilia. Then it fires off secondary anchors, fimbria and pertactin, for a totally unbreakable bond. It literally hooks into the exterior of our cells and just flat out refuses to let go.
Now, sitting completely outside the cell like that leaves the bacteria totally exposed to our immune system's first responders. But the bacteria pulls off an absolute microscopic heist. Using a specific surface protein called vagate, it literally steals our own cells' protective shields. It wraps itself in our biological armor, effectively short-circuiting our complement system's C1 attack. It perfectly cloaks itself from our first line of defense. It's basically microscopic identity theft.
With those first responders completely neutralized, the bacteria unleashes a devastating 1-2 punch. Step 1. It releases pertussis toxin, or PT, which cuts off the chemical distress signals, completely silencing the local immune cells so they can't call for backup. Step 2. It deploys adenylate cyclase toxin, or ACT. This ambushes any immune cells that do somehow manage to arrive, hijacking their energy source by converting their ATP to cyclic AMP, systematically destroying them. Brilliantly and terrifyingly, it isolates the battlefield and slaughters the rescuers.
This incredibly precise microscopic sabotage leads directly to the disease's most malicious physical symptom: paroxysm. Coming from the Greek word for exasperation, this describes the hallmark, severe coughing fit of pertussis. Because the airway is so fundamentally compromised, these coughing fits are violently exasperating and can last for minutes on end. Patients cough so incredibly hard that they can literally physically pull back muscles or even break their own ribs.
So what triggers that extreme reaction? As the bacteria multiplies, it essentially litters. It sheds structural pieces of its own cell wall called tracheal cytotoxin, or TCT. Our immune sensors detect this loose bacterial debris floating around and absolutely panic. They go into massive overdrive, tricking our own cells into producing toxic, overwhelming amounts of a chemical called nitric oxide in a desperate attempt to clear the area.
Which brings us to the anatomy of the famous whoop. In a truly tragic twist of microscopic warfare, that overproduction of nitric oxide actually ends up killing our own ciliated epithelial cells, the very sweeping system designed to keep our airway clean. Without the cilia, dead cells, fluid, and mucus just build up into this thick, suffocating gunk.
Severe swelling constricts the airway further. With the natural cleaning system completely destroyed, violently coughing is literally the only way left to manually force that debris out of the lungs. The patient has to desperately gasp and whoop for air. But while this local airway destruction is happening, it triggers something incredibly strange in the blood, a huge diagnostic clue. While the bacteria is suppressing local immune cells in the lungs, the body uniquely floods the peripheral blood with over 10,000 lymphocytes. This is a massive diagnostic anomaly. In contrast to most bacterial infections, seeing a patient with a persistent cough alongside this massive spike in lymphocytes gives doctors an undeniable, glaring red flag. Catching that red flag is one thing, but actually confirming the infection used to be a complete diagnostic nightmare. Think about common bacteria like strep or staph. They grow overnight on standard clinical media. But this invader? It grows incredibly slowly. It takes almost a full week to show up in a lab, and it demands a highly specific diet of potato starch and blood just to become visible. And get this is fascinating. Ordinary cotton swabs will literally kill the bacteria on contact.
As you can imagine, waiting an entire week for a culture while a child is violently coughing is just agonizing. Fortunately, modern medicine fought back. We now use polymerase chain reaction, or PCR testing. Instead of trying to keep this incredibly picky bacteria alive and waiting for it to slowly grow in a lab, PCR detects the organism's unique DNA directly from the patient in just a day or two. It's an absolute game changer, allowing us to find the invader and intervene so much faster.
But tracking our human counterattack to prevent this disease reveals a really long uphill battle. The organism was first discovered by Jules Bordet and Octave Gengu back in 1900, and they finally managed to culture it in 1906. But it took until 1943, almost 4 decades, to develop the first successful whole-cell vaccine. And we didn't perfect the modern acellular vaccine until the 1980s, thanks to Japanese researcher Yuji Sato.
So why the massive delay? Well, early whole-cell vaccines used the entire killed bacteria. The problem was that included a potent endotoxin called lipid A, which made kids violently ill with high fevers and muscle aches. The brilliant breakthrough came when researchers realized they didn't need to inject the whole bacteria. They isolated just those grappling hooks we talked about earlier, along with the Pertussis toxin, to create the acellular vaccine. It trains the immune system to block the attachment points while completely avoiding the toxic lipid A. Think about it. If the bug can't attach, it can't infect.
Yet, despite our incredible biological knowledge and these highly effective vaccines, the battle is absolutely far from over. This number is deeply sobering. Out of an estimated 20 million cases worldwide, this sophisticated bacteria still claims at least 160,000 lives globally every single year, primarily striking the youngest and most vulnerable among us.
As we wrap up this explainer, we're actually left with a genuinely chilling medical mystery. You see, Bordetella pertussis doesn't naturally inhabit any animals. It only lives in humans. We also know that epidemics of whooping cough cycle every 3 to 5 years. On top of that, the bacteria has a specific genetic switch that allows it to completely turn off its virulence factors and go entirely dormant when the environment isn't right. So, here is the question I want to leave you with. Where exactly does this master microscopic invader lay dormant, hiding silently among us, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again?